Barry, this is Tom Nelson from Brooklyn.
Yes, Tom.
I haven't in a while, but I thought that idiot Bob Grant would never take a day off. I think you're much better than he is. Listen, I just want to say something about an article in the news about Jack Abbott wanting a ticket to Cuba if and when he ever gets out of prison. I'm all for that. I think that if he ever is released, I think that he should go there and take that jerk Norman Mailer with him. As a matter of fact, it's in a place like Cuba, in a communist country, that scum like Abbott would get what he deserved, not time in some comfortable prison off the taxpayers' money. I think it's high time that we get tough on crime and criminals, and that's why I hope that whoever is elected to the governor of New York State will institute the death penalty, and that would be Lou Lehrman, I guess, as opposed to Mario Cuomo. Another thing, how do you feel about that, Barry?
About the death penalty?
Yeah, no, about what I said about Abbott and criminals, going to, leaving this country and going to communist countries. They think they can find something better there. They're welcome to it. As a matter of fact, I'd even chip in to buy them a ticket. I think it'd be better than wasting our tax dollars keeping these bums alive in prison.
Now, the closest person to what I consider the right plan, which of course is the Farber plan, is Congressman John Leboutillier. See, French mismanagement, just hold Cuba where it is in your fantasy for a moment. French mismanagement gave Devil's Island. By the way, we're sitting here with a Scandinavian. They are Helga Bovine, who you heard earlier. Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, these marvelous blue-eyed people who live up there in the Westchester County of the planet Earth. They are the original social liberals. Every place I go where there's trouble, I see Swedish women with Red Cross armbands giving away milk. When I die, no matter which way I go, I'm sure the first person I'm going to meet in hell or heaven is going to be a Swedish Red Cross girl with an armband giving me a cup of milk.
Listen, Barry, I don't like John Leboutillier, that's fine with, his fantasy about, an island off of Alaska. In lieu of, let's say, some real stringent measures to take care of these bums, these criminals, like the death penalty and an end to probation and stiff prison sentences, I think that would be a marvelous idea. I think Abbott is onto something. And like I said, if he takes that idiot Mailer with him, and for that matter, he should take that dope Bob Grant with him.
Stop. Wait. No, I'm going to cut you off symbolically if you don't start talking nice. Yeah.
Listen, I just want to say one thing, because I know you have other calls, and I hate it when a blowhard gets on and takes too much time. What I want to just say is that I hope that you sit in a lot more for Bob Grant. All right, now would never take a day off.
Please, no. I have cut you off for one reason. I don't want to win your enmity. In broadcasting, every day is election day, and we need every vote we can get. No question about it. However, I cut you off for the following reason. You remind me of something that Eugene V. Debs, the great labor organizer, wrote one time. Impressed me so much. He wrote about the personality of a mob. There was a mob on his side. It was his mob. They had released him from prison, and people who loved him were hoisting him on their shoulders, and this man wrote an essay on the ugliness of a mob and how terrible it was. This mob was for him at the moment, but it could turn against anybody and anything and become a wild, man-killing animal at any other moment. I just am uncomfortable with support like yours. I'm uncomfortable with people like you liking me and admiring me and approving of me. I just don't like to speak like you speak or think in terms. You've got an ugly energy in your voice. I know some sensitive young people who talk in terms of vibes and vibrations and karma and negative this and that. You make me understand what they are talking about. Let me simply use you then, having thanked you and bid you goodbye, let me use you to bring up an idea that I think has a lot of merit. Here you're talking about sending the bums and the scums away, and then you turn and you say John Leboutilier's fantasy of an island off the coast of Alaska. Forget Alaska and forget fantasy. French mismanagement and cruelty gave Devil's Island a bad name. I see nothing wrong with an island in a milder climate. I mean, doesn't Scripture tell us that God wants not the death of the sinner, but that he shall turn from his sinful ways? What's wrong with an island in American Samoa? I don't care if they have palm trees. I don't care if the climate is pleasant. The convicted felon, and we can gimmick the rules, third conviction, second serious felony, first crime of, or second crime of violence. Let's have a system where they go to this island, you see, and there's no term. They stay there until a panel of experts on that. I don't mean graduate sociologists who went to and from school in modern limousines. I mean, I would be more inclined to have retired drill instructors from Paris Island who sort of know men. And I'd like for when let's say that you let him back, so you don't pin him down to a term. And I can see Helga Bouvin smiling. He cannot believe that he's in America, hearing an American broadcaster who wears a necktie and looks nice and everything, recommending, in effect, another Devil's Island. That's exactly what I'm recommending, an Angel's Island this time, something done by Americans in a 1980s kind of way, where there are adequate sleeping quarters, where a bugle blows, where they fall out and get up and do calisthenics, and maybe a mile or two, if not 26, before breakfast, and then they have a good high-protein. I pay assiduous attention to nutrition. I'm convinced after 23 years of broadcasting and keeping an open mind about everything that there is a link between nutrition and criminal behavior. I believe that. It would be, if done correctly, a marvelous thing. And think of the money. Do you realize one reason we're letting criminals loose is there's not enough room in jails? It costs much less to keep them on some island. I suggest one in the American Samoa group.
Hello, Barry. This is Bob. I'd like to take a shot at answering your questions about why Iran challenged the credentials of Israel, but not of Iraq. It's because the Iranians blame Saddam Hussein's government, not the Iraqi nation, for the September 1980 invasion of Khuzestan. And they regard the current Ba'athist government in Baghdad as criminal and illegitimate. And they're planning to overthrow Saddam Hussein if they can, but they do not regard the Iraqi nation itself as criminal or illegitimate, while in the case of Israel, the Zionist state, they do. And I tend to agree with them.
Well, until you said until you said your tagline, I would have had no quarrel with you. You're giving a point of information. It stretches my credibility that a regime like Iraq or Iran would say unto the other, I don't want you out of the United Nations, even though you invaded me and you're killing my men, as many as you can, because I know it's just an aberration, something you're living through at the moment. All right, fine. You think that's what Iran's heart is. You go ahead and think that. But when you say you agree with them, I say to you, young man, how dare you agree with a totalitarian, feudalistic, primitive dictatorship that a democracy like Israel has no right to exist?
Well, it's not a primitive totalitarian dictatorship. It's a freer country than it was under the late Shah. But the fact is, the point is trying to make is they're not questioning the right of Iraq to exist. They're questioning the right of Israel.
I am questioning your right to take up more than you have already taken up on an American talk show, questioning the credentials of the only democracy anywhere in the neighborhood at the hands with whom you agree of and I repeat, I feel a little bit unfair because you can't answer me back. I've cut you off and I'm going on to another caller. But I feel invulnerable to contradiction when I refer to the regime of Iran and Iraq, and pick a regime, any regime in the neighborhood. You want it to be Jordan's? Do you want it to be Saudi Arabia's? Pick any regime anywhere around. They are dictatorships. Israel is a democracy. Count me, pal, on the side of democracies every time until Americans realize that they are our natural allies, until we gather around us the 20 democracies left on the planet Earth: Norway, Sweden, Holland, Belgium, France, Finland, Iceland, Canada, United States of America, of course, Great Britain, Ireland, Switzerland, Austria, West Germany, did I say France? Israel, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. That's about it, pal. That's all the democracies we have left. As long as the likes of you keep agreeing with feudalistic, primitive, barbaric, totalitarian, Ayatollah-run and Ayatollah-ridden regimes like Iran's that did not treat our hostages all that nicely. I mean, is it polite to invade an embassy and grab hostages? Until people like you begin to ally yourselves with democracies, then I will continue to have, what do they call it, concern. It's a chance. Lebanon was a model. If you have pain for Lebanon, you must have information about Lebanon. Lebanon was the only Arab democracy for years and years. Israel never had a problem with Lebanon. Lebanon drove the other Arab nations up the wall because there was sort of a de facto eye-winking gentleman's agreement that there would be no conflict between Lebanon and Israel. I even suspect that there was some deliberate illicit trade between those two nations. Lebanon was balanced. The Lebanese constitution, democratic, parliament, the president should always be a Maronite Christian. The vice president would always be a Muslim of the Sunni sect, and the president of the parliament would always be a Muslim of the Shiite sect. And for years, Beirut was the Switzerland of the East. Beirut was stability. Beirut was luxury. Beirut was an awful lot of good, clean fun, particularly for Arab leaders who lived in ascetic societies where they couldn't have any, quote, fun, unquote, in their own countries. They went to Beirut, and they did not waste much time with prayer, fasting, and meditation. And this was Lebanon. So now Lebanon falls into bad times, brought about by the PLO, the ouster of which was brought about by the Israelis. So I think Lebanon can find its way back to a peaceful, democratic, even keel. I certainly wouldn't want to chop them up right now because they have had miserable luck. I cannot understand people who want to chop up the present, I'm talking about now the present boundaries of Israel. Can't we find justice for the people living here and there? Israel is simply There are certain countries that are that just geographically don't make sense. If a computer redesigned the political map of the world, it would explode when it came to a Chile. Chile is long and skinny and just it doesn't look like a country. There's a country called Gambia, which is. Oh, are you ready for this now? The Gambia is completely surrounded by Senegal. It is a river. Gambia is about 350 miles long and about 4 blocks wide. It is like a corkscrew just on both sides. It's a little wider than that. I'm horsing around. But it's not much wider than that. It's like a little eel. It's like a little electric eel swimming through Senegal, a non-viable country. Take a look at the so-called West Bank. The waistline of Israel before the Six-Day War was about 10 to 16 miles. That's all from the Jordanian, from the westmost point of Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. I understand there were signs in Israel, in Israeli trains, that said passengers are requested not to lean their heads out of the country. Now, give Israel a break. Give Lebanon a break. Don't chop them up. Simply remove. A woman need not be fat to be charming. A country need not be large to be democratic and comfortable and prosperous. But give them why not remove the causes that breed conflict? In the case of Lebanon, the PLO. Now they have a different business address, and now peace may come to Lebanon. Why are you in such a hurry to chop them up? Maybe, let me say something that Lenny Bruce used to say. And I'm saying it in the opposite direction from what Lenny Bruce used to scream the ugliest words in the world, the most distasteful words that I don't use on or off the air. And he used to say, look, you got to get used to once you get used to the word, it's an ordinary word. It's called desensitization. Lenny Bruce felt he was fulfilling a mission, and he thought his mission is to make the world catch up make the world get 5,000 years ahead of where it is, and the first thing you got to do is quit looking at cuss words as cuss words or dirty or anything like that. That was Lenny Bruce's self-assigned mission to the world, okay? And that's how his tactic was to desensitize people to the use of those words by shouting them from the stage over and over until they lose their clout and lose their bark and lose their bite and lose their meaning and become emulsified little utterances that shock nobody. Okay, that's Lenny Bruce's thing. I want to desensitize people to the idea of a new Devil's Island. Sure, it sounds a little shocking at first, but when you read the budget for jails and see how overcrowded our jails are and what new jails cost and how the public votes down bond issue after bond issue to build new jails, why build a jail? Islands are free.
Congratulate you on getting to this prison island, but I chastise you for wanting to make prisoners out of free people. Why don't we give these people a minimum kit and put them on Samoa and let them survive and not as they wish? And let murderers live with murderers, let rapists live with rapists, and let us use the Defense Department with satellite surveillance, radar, and all the modern technology to ensure that nobody escapes from this island.
John, I think I'm going to treat your question seriously. I don't know whether you intend it
I
seriously.
am serious, Barry. I'm dead serious.
All right. By the way, are we getting that static over the radio? If so, I have to put you on hold. All right. We have a good relationship, but a very bad connection. I have a feeling that he who can, therefore must. I feel that if we can reach in, gee, can you believe I'm talking like a bleeding heart? I'm sorry. If we have the power to reach in and redeem some lives and bring them back from an early mistake. Now, before...
Redeem the people who were murdered, Barry.
Fine, but that's impossible. But you see, look, I don't think you mean what you say either. I think you are simply fed up with people who don't care about the difference between the hardened criminal and the rescuable criminal. I say take the time to discern the difference, and I would consign the hardcore to the same fate that you would consign them to. I have no sympathy for them, but it would hurt my conscience forever if I let some smart-aleck kid go to that island who got in with the wrong crowd and made a mistake. I just can't give up on people as handily as you can, but I can certainly get as angry at criminals.
Barry, who's going to stay up? I love Congressman LeBoutillier, but he wants to put it up in the Arctic and make prisoners out of the prison guards.
I see what you mean. You've made your point. I've made mine. Look, let's start a serious debate on it. Maybe. Look, I would rather have some island than no island. I would like to smash through and have the island concept of imprisonment re-embraced.
Don't have guards there.
Okay. No, I'm going to have guard, but you and I'll fight that out at the proper time. Thank you very much. Barry Farber, filling in for Bob Grant. Militarism is awful. Anti-militarism is awful. I heard during the Army-Navy game a snide commentator talking, it sounded like a revelation. I thought for a minute he'd found some new Pentagon papers. He told us the cadets from West Point have been issued instruction manuals for this game, what uniform they shall wear, how they shall march onto the field, how they shall stand during the game, when they shall cheer, and same with the midshipmen. Now, see, the ones who say that don't realize that's bigotry. This is my typical liberal attempt to defend a hated minority, namely the military. The worst kind of bigotry is when it doesn't even realize it's bigotry. We just figure this is what our crowd knows about them, the military. I mean, don't those regulations make the military seem ridiculous? They tell them what to wear and where to sit and how they shall march. Doesn't that make them unfortunate? And doesn't that make us much better, we with our civilian clothes and civilian schools and our girlfriends and our blankets and our hip flasks and our six-packs and our honking caravans going by the fraternity houses and our fist fights at halftime and our absolute freedom to wear whatever we have? I'd just like to point out to those who despise the military. By the way, I saw that same thing on a sports page, nationally syndicated. Big deal being made that the Army cadets and the Navy midshipmen march according to a preordained plan. And they try to make them look, with insinuendos. Take an ink blot test right now. Ready? Okay, quickly. Answer to yourself. What kind of people obey orders? Hitler, right? Hitler Youth. Aren't they the ones who obey orders? Well, I offer that as the rotten, wretched core of this instinctive anti-militarism. The military people are the ones who obey orders. We, on our side, presumably sit in foxholes and meditate between the likely mandates of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. But those Hitler Youth, those Nazis, they obey orders. Well, let me tell you something right straight. The only reason we won World War II is because we managed to find and train more people who obeyed more orders better than Adolf Hitler did. I was not asked to vote the entire time I was in military service. The military is admittedly a deliberate fascism. They don't vote. No. They do not vote. There is no proportional representation by division, platoon, squad, unit. There is no constituent assembly. There is no opposition who can challenge the majority view. It is giving orders and taking orders. And without that deliberate fascism called the military, freedom could not exist. American democracy could not survive. So I call for a little understanding. I call for a little hooray. I call for some love to the people who are willing to submerge voluntarily their individual preferences and liberties, put on the uniform of the United States of America, learn not just how to do the old marching and the old push-ups, but the new computer targeting in the defense of the United States of America. I'm afraid I never can. If you don't like military, shaved head, long gray overcoat, marching in drill formation regimentation, then the next time our national interest is threatened, why don't you hail one of those honking college car caravans going down Fraternity Row? But I fear that if the left wins in Europe, we will see the non-violent takeover by the Soviet Union because of the collapse of NATO, the inerting of the will. I think we'll see the Finlandization. You know, Finland is helpless. Finland is not just neutral, but neutralized by the tremendous power of the Soviet Union right next door. I just love it. Forgive me. I don't want war. That's why I feel this way.
Right.
I want peace, and I think the path to peace is to have Gromyko go into West Germany and make an absolute blithering fool out of himself by campaigning openly for Helmut Kohl's opponent, the Social Democrats, who openly said that they would not allow nukes on West German soil. Now, but I mean, don't you love the American media? The minute the returns come in from West, up until the election, this was a referendum on whether or not the German people want American nuclear weapons stationed on German territory, and let's watch in Sunday's election and stay tuned. But wait a minute, sir, the minute the election ended, what did these same simpering double-standard masters of propaganda in America tell us? Oh, the nuclear question was just a small part. There were overriding economic issues. But I would rather have popular, nonviolent popular uprisings against the left. That's my favorite political you may have your favorite sporting spectacle. My favorite political spectacle is nonviolent popular vote uprisings against the left. That pleases me. I'm sorry, that just pleases me. Does indeed mean red and prekrasny, krasivi. There are many words for it, ma'am. If you want to get into a linguistic sense. Вы говорите по-русски?
Я говорю по-русски.
Откуда вы?
Я с Польски.
Да. Если вы из Польши, вы никак не говорите по-русски. Неужели вы верите этой пасне?
По-польски, я говорю по-жидовски.
No, ma'am, don't say Zhidovsky. You just said a bad word. No.
Еврейский.
No, that's Еврейский. That's right. You know, when you say to a Russian Jew, do you speak... What you wanted to do is say, do you speak Yiddish, okay?
Right.
But when you say, do you speak Zhidovsky, you know what that's like?
Zhid means very bad in Polish.
Right, that's like saying, do you speak kike?
But
And I don't think you meant to say that.
That word. It's only a word.
Anyhow, we've each...
to me. I'm a Zhid. And I'm even a dirty Zhid once in a while.
We've each taught each other one little piece of Russian, so we're 1 and 1. Thank you very much. After World War II, when India broke free, the American liberals practiced their hands and glands on India. Oh, we encouraged the Indians. The more pseudo-intellectual Indians who came over here and criticized America and our race relations and our material. Oh, we loved criticism from India, the third world, Nehru, and Krishna Menon. Remember V.K. Krishna Menon? His hot eyes burning out of his high saturnine forehead over at the United Nations, just heaping denunciations upon the West and hugs and kisses upon the Soviet Union, even when Stalin was alive. And the more they kicked us, the more we loved it. And I think we just plain old spoiled India. We spoiled India like you can spoil a child. I think right after they were a child, right after their independence, we simply trained the Indians to believe that the more they dump on us, the more high shrieking love we are going to send back in their direction. The fact that the achievements in communist China have been grotesquely exaggerated by American film stars and their television crews. In spite of the fact that we have a romantic image, which is not true. The Fox Butterfield image is my image of communist China. Fox Butterfield of the New York Times gave us an epic book, a groundbreaking, landmarking book, Alone in the Bitter Sea, telling a dismal story about life in communist China today. But I think...
The irony is out of everything is that
India is always looking for the atomic bomb when there are people starving in the streets over there.
Look, if self-righteousness would explode like atoms, then India would be the biggest superpower in the world. Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, Barry?
Yes.
Barry, as you know, the Chicken Little Sky is Falling liberals are trying to pass a nuclear freeze amendment, which will surreptitiously give the Soviet entity overwhelming thermonuclear superiority. Under the smoke screen of detente, the Soviets have continued to build up the most massive military machine in history. I don't know, Barry, if you are aware of the book by the great General Grigorenko of the Soviet entity who was exiled to the United States. But in his book, he states at the end that the Soviets have used detente as a weapon against the United States. Barry, one of these liberals going to wake up and realize...
Answer me. Listen, what do you mean General Grigorenko was exiled to the United States?
General Grigorenko was put in Soviet psychiatric prison hospitals because he sought to, one, reform the Soviet system. He protested against the mass relocation and genocide of Crimean Tatars.
Forgive me, I've got to go right now. Thanks very, very much. Go in with the people to study the way they live. And he came back and wrote a magazine article on what he saw. What he saw were grotesque methods to control the population, aborting women against their will in their 9th month of pregnancy, even committing infanticide on occasion to help control the burgeoning Chinese communist population. Stanford University kicked him out of the PhD program with a sanctimonious blast at his unanthropological type conduct, and you're not supposed to go to the press. You're an anthropologist, not a journalist, and your mission is to protect the host population. And if you go writing articles embarrassing governments like the Chinese Communist government, then other anthropologists are going to find it more difficult to get in, and you're going to wind up harming instead of helping the host population, which you're supposed to be. Oh, well, we don't like ugly words on our air, and I don't like to use those words even in locker rooms, but that's what my heart is full of right now at that particular story, because it just emblazons the double standard. Now, fantasize with me for a moment. Just let your feet soar. We are now in Israel. An anthropologist from Stanford University has, let us surmise, found Israeli authorities forcing Arab women to have abortions in their 9th month to limit the Arab population, and even killing Arab babies at birth to limit the Arab population. Now, see, a Stanford anthropologist, let's say, sees this and comes back to America and doesn't write it in one of those dull, thick-ankled anthropological reports. He says, hey, this is pretty bad. And he tells a magazine, and the magazine prints it. Would Stanford University kick that anthropologist out of its program, of its PhD program? I think Stanford University would call itself off for the week just to celebrate its enthusiasm for this young, whistleblowing hero's courageous revelation, which can help save so many people once the eyes of the world are fixed upon this grotesquerie. Double standard. It's okay to embarrass Israel, but don't you dare embarrass communist China. Now, as long as we're talking double standard, something else just, I have high standards of irritation. I'll bet you this didn't irritate many of you. It did irritate me. South Africa broadened its parliamentary base to include, fasten your seatbelt, not blacks, but Indians and coloreds. They have a lot of classifications there. Well, the New York Times sprung the length of its chain and sunk its fangs into South Africa. What a fraud, what a ruse, what a deception. The Times threw a conniption. And others did too. South Africa earned more ugly editorials because it brought Indians who live in South Africa and coloreds. I don't know what they are, mulattoes. I keep forgetting. They keep on telling me and I keep on forgetting. Anyhow, they're not blacks. And they brought them into government and expanded the base of the government. And South Africa got denounced. Now, suppose the Soviet Union, which is run by even a smaller percentage of its population than South Africa, suppose the Soviet Union were to say, look, we tiny handful of power elite should not run everything. Let's broaden the representation. Let's broaden our popular base. Let's let a few more elements in who do not share power at the moment and let them share power. I'll bet you that same New York Times would have roped off Times Square just so they could shoot Roman candles from the top of the New York Times building in joy, in congratulations of this great liberalizing move. Nobody's forcing him to, but here the Soviet Union is broadening the base of... Oh, too much. My doctor told me to avoid excitement. I wouldn't be able to go to that New York Times congratulatory rally for the government of the Soviet Union for broadening its base. So, if the Soviet power elite broadens its base voluntarily, we all rejoice, I suspect. But when South Africa broadens its base, not sufficiently for the New York Times taste and not sufficiently for my taste, but when it nonetheless voluntarily broadens its base, move in the right direction, they incur denunciation. I don't like tyranny following a dictatorial regime's people to free American soil. One of the greatest moments since World War II was when there was somebody in the Soviet embassy in Australia who wanted to defect to the West. And the Soviet thugs barreled him up and took him to the airport, and they made one mistake. They didn't make it sanitary. They didn't insist that all the Australians get out of the way, and they didn't drive a truck right up to the airplane and put a tube between the cabin of the truck or the back of the truck and the side of the plane. They didn't do it in the neat Soviet way. These Soviet thugs bundled this guy up and dragged him across the airstrip, and he obviously didn't want to go, and the Australian police came and descended on them, grabbed the Soviet goons, pulled them away, and set the Soviet would-be defector free. I would just love to have pictures. I don't have pictures of Farrah Fawcett on my bedroom wall, but I would love to have a picture of the face of the Soviet goons on that Australian airstrip when the Australian police came and reminded them that this was not the Soviet Union and they do not grab people in a democracy like Australia and take them against their will and put them on airplanes. Young person, get him interested in the media. If you have a young person who has not sucked up the exhaust pipe of all these incredible liberal myths, the big lies. I mean, do you believe poverty causes crime? I grew up accepting that as a fact of life, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. I no longer believe it. Do you believe that capitalism is selfish? I grew up I no longer believe it. It works wonders for more people than any other system ever ordained. Get people who feel like we do into the media. His memory, he probably dreams about those days every night. He's Jan Nowak. He's National Director of the Polish-American Congress, and I said Irina Lasota was from Solidarity. She corrected me during the break and said, Barry, I'm from the American Committee for Solidarity.
My view. But as I say, there was a continuity. And you cannot understand the phenomena of post-war Poland, the very fact that Poland deviated so much from the Soviet Orthodox model in every respect, without understanding what happened in the last war. That's why I hope that my book, Courier from Warsaw, may help American readers to understand better solidarity and to understand better the present and perhaps to see more clearly the future. I must say that although in my life I was almost always on the losing side, I think I shared with the Polish people one thing. I never lost hope, and the Poland never lost hope and never surrendered. Well, of course, the sanctions against Poland alone will not help their objectives because it's the decision to ban solidarity was taken by Moscow, not in Warsaw. The Warsaw regime is just a puppet regime right now. So what we would like is the escalation of pressure against the Soviet Union to the extent which would compel Moscow in her own interest to allow some kind of accommodation or compromise in Poland. Unfortunately, the West fails to undertake any kind of collective actions, which in itself sends a very dangerous sign of weakness to the Soviet Union of leverage. The first is grain embargo. The second is gas pipeline. The third is not embargo on credits, but simply discontinuation of subsidizing credits. But the Polish people, in spite of the fact that it is causing great hardship to them, they in fact support the sanctions as a means of pressure against the regime. But they would like to see more pressure on the Soviet Union.
Notice what Mr. Nowak said. He did not say that we should embargo credits. He said we should quit subsidizing credits, and I hope there's going to be an American rebellion when Americans from coast to coast learn what Mr. Nowak means, because most Americans don't know we are subsidizing credits. For some reason that nobody can explain, banks that extend credit to Poland are guaranteed by the American government. In other words, the American government says, go ahead, it's good for east-west traffic, it's good for Dayton, it's good for peace, we'll pay if they don't.
Most of it is being done by the West Europeans, although particularly West Germany. That banks are giving credit at the much lower interest rate than the market interest rate, and the difference is being paid by the government.
A credit to what nation?
To the Soviet Union, to Poland, to other countries of the bloc. The West pumped into the Soviet bloc almost $80 billion over the last decade. Marshall Plan to Western Europe was $18.5 billion. Even if you consider the valuation of the dollar, what the Soviets got in the last 10 years is much more than Western Europe got under Marshall Plan.
You know, they say life imitates art. I don't know anything about that, and I don't particularly care. But when life imitates humor, that wakes even me up. Back in the days of foreign aid, when our leaders told us we were giving money to fight communism in South America, giving money to South America to fight communism in South America, and we were giving money to Africa to fight communism in Africa, we were giving money to Europe to fight communism in Europe. Some comic said, next thing you know, we're going to be giving money to the Soviet Union to fight communism in the Soviet Union. And it was, of course, an exaggeration, the ultimate absurd exaggeration. But that's exactly what we're doing. We are giving money to the Soviet Union. Why? Why didn't it end with Ronald Reagan, who was an anti-communist?
It did stop with Ronald Reagan. The problem is that Reagan would like to Western Europe to stop subsidizing the credits, and he failed in Paris.
The grain did not stop with Ronald
Well,
Reagan.
of course, the lifting of grain embargo is the fault of this administration.
Hold it.
Well, they feel that this is one of the ways to compel the regime, that it gives them a sort of a trump card to force the regime to conclude some kind of a compromise, to negotiate with them. So every Pole I speak to, and I have a lot of communications from Poland, they definitely express support for sanctions, but they expect, above all, more pressure on the Soviet Union.
Most of the Poles I spoke with do think that the sanctions are so far very weak and ridiculous. They seem like they know what freedom is. They want it.
How much freedom Poles already won without any other weapon than their courage and determination. Look at Poland and compare it with any other satellite country. The church is united and independent. The peasants, the farmers, successfully resisted collective occupation.
I have never been soft on the Tito myth. I resent a country in the Balkans pulling a public relations scam and sucking all America over the exhaust pipe. You go to even Midwestern universities, to the political science faculty, and they will say, Tito bolted the Stalinist bloc. Nonsense. Tito was kicked out of the Stalinist bloc by Joseph Stalin and spent the next 6 months trying to get back in. Tito was he may have been the smartest man of the 20th century. Look what he did. The Yugoslav workers had their Polish Revolution in 1952 already. They just refused collectivist agriculture. So when Tito saw he could not collectivize them, he pretended to be the leader eliminating compulsory collectivization. And he said in 1952, okay, farmers, the land, we go back to where we were. Let's get some crops going here. And the workers were so happy, the peasants were so happy, they burned down their barns in Serbia just to celebrate the end of forced collectivization. Tito did his best to break the Roman Catholic Church. Well, you can break a Filipino Catholic, an Irish Catholic, an Italian Catholic, an American Catholic, long before you can break a Croatian Catholic for some reason. And the Croatian Catholic simply would not give up their religion. I don't care how badly Tito wanted him to. So having failed to break the Catholic Church, Tito steps forward, and American liberals just burn dried sassafras root at his feet and claims to be the great champion of rapprochement, of détente, of friendship with the Roman Catholic Church. I must admit, studying the raw history and seeing what he made of it, I think Tito of Yugoslavia has to be the smartest manipulator. I think he made Roosevelt and Stalin look like three-card Monte players on Broadway and 42nd Street. He did not. He achieved some kind of independence after enslaving his nation, some kind of international independence. He and Nehru and Nasser were leaders of the third world. Look, I'm glad the Yugoslav people under Tito did not have to stay inside the Soviet orbit. It was certainly a better life for them. All I resent is the implication that Tito somehow liberalized, because that takes credit away from the real hero, and that is the people.
No, David, do you know that since the state of war in Poland, the Western banks, meaning your bank, my bank, Barry's bank, are giving Poland better terms than before, that we are subsidizing, and Mr. Nowak also said, who are we subsidizing with the grain? We are subsidizing the Red Army, which is killing the Afghans.
Well, but United States can do, even without any consultation with the Allies. For instance, considerable strengthening of the American radios broadcasting to the entire eastern orbit. It's of tremendous importance, one. Second, creating a sort of a committee or institute for democracy or for defense of human rights, which would offer open help to all movements that are fighting for our common values without violence.
Mr. Nowak, I feel like a war criminal interrupting you. As I said, I would not be comfortable with anybody. Certainly I could not marry and live with anybody who wouldn't sit bolt upright as though a shock of electricity had come through the car, the living room, the transistor radio, wherever you're listening. When you heard me or any other commentator say, keep your radio fixed right where it is, we have with us in our studio representatives of Solidarity and TASS. Anybody who could yawn and say, oh, dear me, politics, two people involved in international affairs, probably, Do you realize what I'm talking about? I am saying that American members of a committee to support the work of Solidarity in Poland and the New York bureau chief of TASS, the Soviet news service. This is, for me, a monumental moment in broadcasting, because when I grew up, you never talked to Soviet reporters. You never talked to people from TASS. It was impossible. We wanted to, but for some reason, we never could. One wants to proceed in a normal fashion, but one who is sensitive to political affairs finds it very, very difficult to sit here and clear my throat and straighten my tie and pretend that it's absolutely normal to have a spokesperson from the Soviet Union right here in our cozy little group with Irina Lasosa of the Committee to Support Solidarity and Art Puddington, publisher of a book entitled Workers Under Communism.
Workers Under Communism was established last year. It's a quarterly journal. And the League for Industrial Democracy, my organization, publishes the magazine in cooperation with the International Labor Program at Georgetown University. The very first act of Yuri Andropov was to institute a series of policies aimed at what he described as slacking, work shirking, slovenly behavior by workers. For example, let me indicate one thing that's being done. There have been sweeps in major Soviet cities
whereby the security forces...
Andropopsicle.
Yes, this is a new policy. This did not go on in the Brezhnev era. The police go through the streets. They check everyone's identification papers, everyone who is standing in line to buy food, and as we know in the Soviet Union, you had to stand in line for hours to buy food or buy anything. Queues in movie theaters and other public places. If it is discovered that they are away from work without permission, or they're supposed to be in work and they're out on the street, they're taken to the police headquarters, they're given a reprimand, given a lecture, they're taken back to their place of work. Their superiors are upbraided for letting them leave. Well, this is the attitude. In other words, it's very clear that the Soviet economy is in a great deal of difficulty. The Soviet Union has several alternatives. There could be basic reforms in the system, the injection of more incentives. That's one alternative. And the second alternative is repression, and it would appear to us that repression is the way that Andropov is proceeding.
I wonder if you're going to make... I think we should compliment whoever it was with Nikita Khrushchev when he was on the David Susskind show when he visited America in 1959. Susskind and Khrushchev. The name of the show was Open End, and they carried... It didn't last half hour, hour and a half. The show just went on and on and on into the night. And in order to counter criticism, look at that station there having Khrushchev on, the leader of the communist world. In order to offset that, they ran a commercial for Radio Free Europe. Now, the guests do not hear the commercials. Are you aware of that out there? The guests don't sit here and listen to commercials and smile at each other and take notes. There is a cone of silence in the studio while the commercials go booming forth into the outside world. I'd love to congratulate and compliment whoever it was on the Soviet team. Smart enough, sharp enough, aware enough, suspicious enough, paranoid enough. Not just to wonder if they were going to put poison in Khrushchev's coffee or something, but to wonder what is going on the air when we can't hear it. Somebody was quick enough to listen, look at something, listen to something, and write Khrushchev a little note so that when Khrushchev came back on the air, he didn't do it with his shoe, but he did it with his fist. He started pounding and said, well, how dare you insult me by running a Radio Free Europe commercial? Why, young man, don't you know? I forget exactly what he said, but I remember the audience, the American, democratic, free world audience sympathized with Nikita Khrushchev. They thought it was a sort of a low blow that the channel, I'm sure David Susskind had nothing to do with it, but the channel, sort of to protect itself, thought they'd bring in a little Radio Free Europe commercial, and Khrushchev took this as an insult, which it was. I was Lasota, who teaches political science at Fordham, active in the Polish opposition, a member of the American Committee to Support Solidarity, and Arch Puddington, publisher. Maybe you can't tell a book by its cover, but you can tell a magazine by its name. The title is Workers Under Communism, and it sympathizes with the plight of workers under communism. Mr. Walker, when you jog, did you have native English-speaking teeth? I'm just very much impressed that the Soviet Union can turn out linguists like you who can come over and not only do your job in a foreign country, but can participate in live radio and television, not just discussions. Discussions can be very calm and very easy, but confrontations. Let the others worry about your missile potential. I'm very concerned with your linguistic potential. It is absolutely awesome. I mean, what the Soviet Union can do when it wants to turn out linguists.
Maybe you can comment on the attitude on what just Mr. Setonsky was talking about. I think it's very characteristic, this exchange from which comes the old truth that in a very nationalized state like the Soviet Union, the main and maybe the most precious property of the state are the workers. And although it's called a worker state, the workers are really a property which can be snapped from a cinema into the Siberia, can be moved from the Ukraine into building a pipeline. And I think that what Art Puddington was talking about, that this new tightening of the screw is new and old, because the destruction of the free trade unions started right after 1917. the workers were taken into the independent trade unions really stopped to exist in the 20s. And today, with solidarity, there is this fear in all of the Soviet bloc, including or especially in the Soviet Union, that it can be very contagious, that what the workers in Poland did can spill over into the Soviet Union.
I must tell you something, Irina. This hurts me worse than it hurts. No, it doesn't hurt. It's going to hurt you worse than it hurts me. But it's going to hurt us both the same, really. The only thing is you're Polish. I've talked to some people from other Eastern European communist countries. The biggest triumph of Soviet propaganda lately, I'm sure you already know this, the other Eastern European countries do not sympathize with Poland. I mean, I don't mean just the party newspapers and the official government communist proclamations. The man in the street in Budapest, I'm afraid I have to report, does not sympathize with Poland because the Soviet Union was so clever, they convinced them. They convinced everybody in the Eastern Bloc, not that the Poles are freedom fighters or standing, but that they're parasites. They want the rest of the communist world to support them while they go off on some ego trip and some ridiculous bourgeois adventure and what democracy and trade unions. I got to give my second compliment to Soviet Russia. I wish America could pull off some propaganda coup like this. Can you imagine that the workers of Poland, who themselves were throwing Molotov cocktails at Soviet tanks in 1956, and the workers of Czechoslovakia, who had those Soviet tanks roll over them in 1968, they today don't sympathize with Poland because somebody in Moscow was smart?
Which is a third success of the propaganda. And by the way, we have to remember that TASS is very important in that. But the third success is that you believe that what is being presented to you as a public opinion in Hungary, Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia is a true one. Because what we are really getting is what we know is, first of all, also the different ships traveling, how many of them are traveling. What do we know what the workers in Novosibirsk are thinking?
Irina, what you're saying.
The workers who had seen tanks put into them in 62 and they wanted 1/10 of what the Polish workers wanted.
Maybe I flatter myself. But flattering yourself is the last of our civil rights, correct? Maybe I flatter myself, but I like to think that before Mr. Sapunsky came here, he called somebody at the Soviet mission, and maybe even got as far as Moscow, and my name's Farber, Barry Farber. I hope he read a little bit about me. I hope he knows something about my attitude. Maybe not, but I just kind of hope so. But Irina, you know what side I'm on, even if the representative from TASS doesn't know or doesn't care. Now, you know I am not going to call the Hungarian communist government and say, hey, how do you all feel about solidarity? You know that I'm not going to tell you that if I didn't have it from Hungarian sources that I trust. There is just no groundswell of sense. You know what you're doing right now? You're like the politician who says to the press when it looks like he's losing, all the precincts have not been heard from yet. We still have more precincts to report. And I hope you're right. I hope the worker in Novosibirsk does want what you and I call freedom. I hope the people in Budapest come to their senses and realize what's going on in Poland is
them depose. They may
a freedom
depose, but they may not. They don't present freedom, free trade union, democracy. Even if they are convinced that they pay a high price because the Poles did not do it the right way.
You're aware that it's not that easy. The Soviet propaganda machine, their military may be great, but their propaganda effectiveness is great. Their military cannot be as effective as their international propaganda. Impossible. No way.
Sapunsky had to say, it is, of course, true that in any industrial society there is a tension between labor and management. Management is constantly trying to discipline workers and get more work out of them, and workers are trying to assert their own rights. The difference, of course, is that to discipline the workers in the Soviet Union, police state methods are used. The police are sent out. Workers are rounded up. In the free world, these methods are not used. In fact, we don't even have such things as identity papers or a workbook that can follow you around throughout your working life, so that any time you're fired or dismissed or have a problem with your boss, that information follows you around for the rest of your working life. We don't have such things in this society, and not only that, if anyone attempted to introduce them, we have free trade unions that would fight very hard for the rights of their workers. A couple of other points very quickly. yes, there is a manpower shortage in the Soviet Union. Why is this? Well, one of the main reasons is because their economy is such a failure that it cannot produce enough housing for the young people to live in. Therefore, the birth rate in the Soviet Union is very low, and you find situations where the children, they get married, they have to live with the parents for years and years. They don't want to have children under those situations. The abortion rates in the Soviet Union are absolutely appalling. You have, and it's a known fact, there have been a number of articles in the Soviet sociological journals about the abortion problem. Women having 10, 11, 12 abortions, simply because since the economy is geared to, I'll have to leave a point, and that is this. Why in the Soviet Union is there a problem of people walking around the streets and doing their shopping in the middle of the workday? The reason, again, is because the economy is incapable of providing enough consumer goods so that they can shop as people in New York or as people in Paris can shop. They can just go into a store and buy things. They have to stand in line. The stores close early. They feel compelled to interrupt their workday to go shopping. And, of course, we know that most women work in the Soviet Union. It's a very difficult situation. So, of course, they are doing these things. It is the only way that they can live.
Arch, do you think the Soviet economy is incapable of producing consumer goods, or do you think that has a lower priority than other goods?
Well, certainly military goods have the absolute highest priority, and there's a huge percentage, much higher percentage of the GNP in the Soviet Union is devoted to military spending than in the West. I also think it's incapable. I mean, I just think that a centralized, planned economy, we keep being told that the judgment on communism is still out. The verdict on communism is still out. We have had over 60 years. The Soviets are simply not catching up with the United States. They are falling further behind in terms of economic efficiency. I think that the failure of that system is very clear.
But what was 100,000 soldiers, Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan, the thousands scattered from Cuba, Africa, 30,000 in Poland, in other East European countries? There is no main shortage of Soviet soldiers there. They are rather, if there is a shortage, it will be rather in factories in Russia proper.
Too many of them for me to meet them during a short session. Well, first of all, I would like to comment on some of the remarks made by Mr. Puddington. First of all, his conclusion about the failure of the Soviet economy seems to me to be baseless completely, because statistics speaks to the contrary. Every year, the output of the Soviet economy increases in comparison to a previous year. Of those problems, these drawbacks are different. Partly they are the legacy of the war, and I cannot subscribe to what Mr. Puddington tried to tell about the reasons of the shortage in the Soviet manpower. What he mentioned is a minor factor in this.
I just thought of two other triumphs of Soviet propaganda. One particularly spectacular, because they have to learn a foreign language to begin to think in terms of this particular triumph. 4 compliments to Soviet propaganda. For me, that's a lifetime payload. First, WMCA Puddington, League for Industrial Democracy, has put out a new magazine entitled Workers Under Communism, and it does not tell a glowing picture of workers under communism. A couple of articles in the first issue, the issue that I had in my hand, are Made in the Gulag, Peace Rates in People's Hungary, Repression of a Dissident Miner, Worker Discontent in the Soviet Union, Views from the Polish Underground. So you get the impression of the political orientation of the magazine that way. Nikolai Satunsky of TASS, you were in midpoint.
We cannot afford to have influx of people to certain cities, towns, where they cannot find the house, the dwelling. Of course, it's up to the United States to have 2 million homeless people in this country. It's their business. But the Soviet power, which I consider to be the most advanced social and fair order, fair system, cannot afford it. And this is another major reason which stands behind this system of identifications papers. I could refer to some others, but I think that that's enough for this moment.
I would like to introduce into this discussion the issue of trade unions in the West and in the Soviet Union as well. Of course, trade unions over here are quite different than the Soviet, so-called Soviet model. It's interesting, though, as Irena alluded to earlier in the discussion, in the initial phases of the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a strong trade union contingent. There were people pushing hard for freedom and autonomy for the trade unions so that they would not get swallowed up by the party bureaucracy. Those people lost out. The first chairman of the Soviet Trade Union Federation ended up dead in the Gulag, Tomsky. And it wasn't simply a Stalinist aberration that led to the destruction of the trade unions in the Soviet Union, but it was Lenin himself, and Trotsky and other leaders of the Bolshevik Party who were thoroughly, totally, completely opposed to any independent existence for trade unions. So what does this mean today? It simply means that the trade unions do not represent workers. They work with management. In fact, most of the presidents of the Trade Union Federation, the All-Union Central Committee of Trade Unions, the majority of these people have either been party officials or have come from the ranks of management. That is to say, they've run a factory or run enterprises in a certain region. They have not been workers. They have come through the bureaucracy or from the ranks of management. And these people are then imposed on the workers. Strikes are illegal in the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Soviet Constitution says that they are illegal because I think that would violate International Labor Organization standards. But in effect, they are illegal. When there was a strike in Novocherkassk in 1962, troops were called in and over 300 people were shot dead.
What? Never heard that
It's
before.
taken a number of years for that information to get out. The Soviet press said hooliganism or something like that at the time, but what happened was a number of the people who participated in the strike were sentenced to prison terms, and they met other Soviet citizens in Siberia. They told them what had happened, and eventually some eyewitness accounts have been smuggled out of the Soviet Union. So we know that that strike did occur. We know that strikes occur from time to time throughout the Soviet Union, but the unions are not supporting the workers. The unions are trying to discipline the workers, try to get them back to work. They're not representing them. Now, I have read all the apologetics for the Soviet trade union model. They are thoroughly unconvincing. I mean, I'm told that we have a different system, that there's cooperation between management and labor, and all this sort of thing. Anyone who suggests to me that there isn't a fundamental tension between workers and management, that the workers in any society need free trade unions, people that will speak up for them militantly, I simply can't take that seriously.
Let's hear what the gentleman from TASS has to say to that.
When Lenin spoke or wrote against independent trade unions, what he meant actually? He meant that during the revolution time, the trade unions should be on the part of the Communist Party, and that the Communist Party, in order to take the power on behalf of workers and in the interest of workers, of course, should have put the task of having the influence in the trade unions of Russia, because through the trade unions, and their influence among the workers, it was the only way actually to realize the task of overthrowing the Tsarist regime and establishing the Soviet power, the power of toilers, power of workers. That, of course, I consider our trade unions is completely free in terms of their relationships with the management, with the local Soviets, with the state power. The trade unions obtain and enjoy that much of power and rights in the Soviet Union that was not in the best dreams of the American workers. And this is widely accepted by a number of American researchers in the field of the trade union movement, such as George Morris and many others. It's the American worker, an American worker cannot see in a dream the situation under which his trade union will dismiss the manager of the plant. This is not the more than once happened and is happening in the Soviet Union. Just it's a horse of another color, because our society is a communist society. A good number, a big percentage of the workers are the Communist Party members. Those who are not, they share the ideals, the goals, the methods of the Communist Party, which does not reflect the interests of monopolists, of private enterprise, because we don't have such. Actually, it's inaccurate and improper to try to distinguish between the workers and the Communist Party, because the Communists and between the trade unions and the Communist Party. Because Communist Party is the organ, is the party, is the force of the workers.
So time, I will simply shorten my third compliment of the day to Soviet propaganda. The first one was to Khrushchev's interpreter, who picked out of thin air that Channel 13 in New York during the Susskind interview was running a Radio Free Europe commercial in time to have Khrushchev respond right away. Compliment to Soviet propaganda number two. They have somehow, I fear, succeeded in having the other Eastern European peoples not sympathize with solidarity. In other words, they view the Poles as opportunistic, parasite, thrill seekers off on some democratic ego trip and not real good, relying on the rest of the communist world to support them. I don't know how Soviet propaganda pulled that off. I fear they have. Compliment number three is in getting us to refer to a nation called Ukraine as the Ukraine and not Ukraine. It all of a sudden loses its nationhood. In other words, if Germany had swallowed up France, Germans wouldn't be going to France, they'd be going to the France, meaning like you go to the Catskills or the Great Plains or the tropics in southern Florida or the flatland. Anyhow, that's compliment number three. The Ukraine is a very insidious way to make a nation a not nation. And the reason that's such a good compliment is because the Russians don't have the word the in their entire language. So how they learned the magic of a the is very interesting. Compliment number four is the way they take something like the repression of Soviet Jews and call it not our Soviet repression of Soviet Jews, but they call it the Jewish question.
Yes. Since 1944, Poland was to be organized like the Soviet Union. I'm talking of social organization, same type of one big family, worker state, one trade union, one party, one everything. In 1980, as we remember, workers in the Lenin shipyard in Gdańsk started a demand for free trade union. And what happened? Overnight, 8 million people dropped their official trade union card. They said, we don't want to have anything to do with that junk. And at that time, it was the fall of 1980, they were risking everything, their jobs, their security, their life. They simply were tearing apart those cards and saying, we want free trade unions. And what? In few months, again, there were 10 million people in solidarity. We know the history. We know that 16 months was even too long for the communists. They destroyed it. The communists again offered the same old model of the Soviet model of the early 20s. We will give you your unions where the management, the party, everything is combined together. We all love each other. And today, with terrible repression, forcing the workers, the government is saying they have 1 million point something in trade unions. The American Solidarity is saying it's not half of it. And still, in most of the factories, in 10 million, again, Lenin still works now. In Nova Huta, they have about 70 workers, half of them retired, who joined this new trade union, which were described by Mr. Satunsky, because this is the same type of trade union as being the workers' trade union. And I think this is why Poland solidarity was so dangerous, because it simply said all of it is one big, fat lie. And this was, I think, maybe the beginning of the undermining of all of the propaganda and ideology, because they stood up and they said, no, it's just the other way around.
Art, when Mr. Satunsky mentioned the name Morris or Morrison, I sort of retired in intellectual guilt because he was mentioning some famous economist or labor writer I'd never heard of. You seem to have recognized the name.
George Morris writes regularly for the Daily World, which is the publication of the American Communist Party, and he spends much of his time criticizing me and my publication. Let me make one very quick point here. As a sort of follow-up to what Irena said, so terrified is the Soviet Union of the idea of a free workers' movement that those courageous workers have, over the past few years, attempted to fight the system. Vladimir Klebanov, who attempted to set up a free workers' movement, not a dissident movement, just a free workers' movement. Alexei Nikitin, who was protesting against unsafe conditions in the mines. What happened to these people? They are now in mental hospitals, along with many other dissidents, of course. But this is, it's a known fact that worker dissidents, a much higher percentage of worker dissidents have wound up in psychiatric hospitals than intellectual dissidents, Jews, whatever else. The Soviet Union is so afraid of this phenomenon of being infected by the solidarity spirit that they have to put worker dissidents in madhouses.
I'm going to jump to another subject before answering the slander that I have heard now.
Go ahead.
First of all, about Novotcherkassk event. Those events have had nothing to do with the strike as itself. Actually, strike is not illegal in the Soviet Union. It is not prohibited by the Constitution or by any other law in the Soviet Union. And this is not because of kind of fear of international labor organizations, because even in the first Soviet Constitution, when there was no international labor organizations, the strike was not prohibited. Strike cannot be prohibited in the Soviet Union because it does not correspond to the essence of the Soviet democracy. The strike very rarely occurs in the Soviet Union because there is no economic and class basis for the strikes. Because strikes is the class confrontation, but we don't have alien classes in the Soviet Union. Of course, there are some strikes in the Soviet Union which are not illegal and which will not be ever, I believe, declared illegal. And the Novotcherkassk strike was one of those. But the prosecution of in Novotcherkassk had nothing to do with the strikes. It had all to do with the order when some very negligible minority of those who were involved in strike made, as Mr. Puddington quite correctly mentioned, acts of hooliganism, burning the offices of the Soviets and other state organizations. And they were prosecuted for that, but not for the strike, not for the participation in the strike.
TASS report on those strikes?
Yes, it did.
I doubt it very good.
Then